Welcome to the BBOWT podcast, our local nature-related podcast. Focusing on our three counties, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, we'll be looking at what can be seen locally on your patch and also on what people can do to help wildlife in your own space.
Hello everyone, I hope you had a great bank holiday weekend and you managed to get out there and see some wildlife. So Liz is taking a break from the podcast this week, and taking her place, our new podcaster for the week, is Katie Horgan, who's our Rough Around the Edges project officer. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here on the podcast. As Andy said, I'm the Rough Around the Edges project officer for a project that's running in the Chilterns in Buckinghamshire. And my role is mostly working with community groups who have small areas that they manage, that they want to manage a bit more for conservation. And so I give them support and advice, and we have a bit of funding that we give to people as well. You can find out a bit more about the project, my project anyway, on the website. But that's kind of where I am. So I'm really kind of small spaces, wildlife, conservation, local places with local people. So I think you invited me here this morning to talk a little bit more about these kinds of spaces, but also about people's gardens and road verges and those plants that we get if we leave nature alone a little bit. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit today this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, Katie. It's good to say we've been fairly Oxfordshire focused so far, so it's good to have someone from another county. And I think we usually start the podcast, don't we, by just having a little go around the table and asking everyone what's of their wildlife highlights of the last week. So, Andy, what have you been out and about this week, and what were your highlights?
So my wildlife highlight this week was in my garden, actually, which was really nice. We had, I heard some greenfinches flying over. We get a pair that come visit the bird table quite a lot. And this female greenfinch had brought along 5 of its chicks to investigate the bird feeder, which is really lovely to watch. And they all sat on this same branch on this tree. I really wanted to get a photo, but then I decided I'm just going to watch it because it's just really nice to watch it rather than always having to get a photo. Yeah, that was definitely my highlight. How about you, Katie?
Yeah, kind of similar for me. I've had the opportunity to just sit and watch the garden a bit, and it's not quite as exciting. I haven't quite got greenfinches. My garden's a little bit cut off from other people's, but I've had kind of female chaffinch in there, and I was watching the starlings as well, messing about on the lawn. So there's quite a lot of insects now, lots of moths, low-flying daytime moths that I've got. Particularly around kind of the grasses and some of the flowers, and I think that the birds are kind of coming in and finding all sorts of invertebrates that are in the grass now. It's only a small garden, but it's nice to see that it is getting visited by some of the wildlife that's out there at the moment. How about Ed?
Me, well, after last week's podcast, we were talking about swifts. It's nice to have seen the swifts return, so it's lovely to sort of hearing the sort of swifts over the garden. But for me, I think the real highlight has just been the roadside verges. So I've been out and about. I mean, just at the moment, just there's clouds of sort of cow parsley and all the buttercups, sort of the garlic mustard. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. So I think that's one of the things we're going to have a chat about today as well, wasn't it? So about the verges and sort of the real increasing importance of verges as well.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about this a bit before, haven't we? That road verges are great. I mean, people notice them, so they're really good anyway. I think you notice when they've been allowed to grow and things are coming up. And of course, some are being cut at the moment, but that's not necessarily terrible because they need some sort of management. But I've been noticing a lot around here as well, like you say, a lot of the cow parsley, which is really great for all kinds of invertebrates that feed on it, also rest up on it just to warm up during the day. And actually, interestingly, I just was reading a research paper about that, which is based in Sweden. And they did a study on a number of different road verges around the country just to see what is it that gives you more plants and flowers growing in a road verge. I think they were quite interested to see if you could predict where those really diverse verges are. And the most interesting thing they found from that is it's not actually about the diversity of the landscape that's around your road verge. It's actually connected to how old the road is. So which I found really interesting, because I was thinking, let's imagine you're trying to decide, should we let it grow long? Should we cut it? How do we manage our road verges? And if you have to make choices about that, if you know how old the road is, you can use that to help you make decisions about how you're managing those places. And I thought it was really interesting, just that it's actually about the age, so how long it's been there, how many plants have come in. There's lots of things around how seeds spread and how long they stay in the verges. And of course, that's great. If you know it's old and you let it grow, you can expect to see quite a lot of plants in there.
Yeah, because I think I've read that roadside verges sort of support over 700 sort of different species of wildflower, which is sort of nearly 50% of our native flora.
Gosh, that's astonishing, isn't it? To have that many.
It's as vast, isn't it? And I think as well, they're so important for corridors as well, as it's not just habitats in their own right. They just allow plants, animals, and seeds to move from place to place as well, which is, we kind of forget sometimes as well. So again, doubly important.
Yeah, I think that linking role that they play is really important, particularly then, if you move from road verges and places where you can manage a bit how much they're mown or not. And then if you think about people's gardens, because they're also little links in the chain, aren't they? So you've got kind of the wider countryside, but how do things move through it? Well, they move maybe through the road verges that are left longer, that they've got some shelter and some food in, but also where are they going to? So are they stopping off in our gardens on the way? And I kind of quite like that link. And I also like trying to say, well, if is what's growing in that verge, have I got that coming up in my garden as well? Which sometimes, but not always, because you never quite know what's been seeded in there as well. I don't know what you find at home, Ed, if you've got kind of lots of native plants in your garden or not so much. How does that look for you?
Not a lot. I mean, it should be said, I think a lot of sort of houses were actually built on old meadows as well. So your lawn can actually hold quite a diverse range of plants. But for us, we inherited basically a turfed rectangle.
Me too.
So not too much. So we've basically removed quite a lot of the turf and just extended our borders. So we've got nice big wild borders. Where we've got sort of native patch, we've got small patches sort of grass, and we put ponds in. But what I have noticed that popping up through is quite a lot of the Germander speedwell and forget-me-nots, which are really lovely, just sort of coming up everywhere, and we just sort of let them grow because they're such attractive little plants. So what about you?
Quite similar to me, although it sounds like you've done quite a lot more work than I have, and I inherited a patch of grass but also a lot of gravel. So I've spent a year just watching what grows in my garden, which in a way brings us a bit onto this topic of letting things grow, because I didn't know what plants were in there. And like you say, lots of, kind of grass and lots of dandelions. Daisies are starting to come up now. Now I've left it longer as well, which is interesting because they can actually cope with being mown, can't they? Because they don't grow so tall. But I'm finding that they've needed to be left alone for a bit to allow the flowers to get away, and now I think they'll cope with being mown as well. But I don't have anything particularly unusual in my garden, but it's still nice to see that there are other plants in there coming through.
I don't think it has to be unusual, does it? I mean, because things like dandelions are just incredible, such a valuable food source for so many insects, whether it's bees, butterflies, hoverflies, pollen beetles. And it's so depressing when sort of people just remove them. Local housing estate, they've gone around with weed killer and just removed all the dandelions. So rather having these lovely little beautiful bright yellow flowers, there's just these dead patches of grass everywhere where they've removed them. I think they're such invaluable foods as our daisies as well.
Yeah, and I've got clover starting to come up as well, which is interesting because I guess clover kind of comes up pretty much everywhere, but I never really noticed that it was in the lawn until I've just left it a bit longer. And I think I don't know if it's even going to get to flower by the end of the month. It seems to take a long time for the flower heads to come through, but they're really important plants in a garden, just partly because of what they do in the soils. So clover's one of these plants that nitrogen's a really important element for plant growth, but lots of plants can't really capture it out of the atmosphere. So as you guys know, obviously clover captures that because it's got little bacteria on its roots that can convert the nitrogen to something usable in the soil. So that's great anyway because it's feeding the soil, but also when it gets the flowers on, the bees absolutely love it. I think they're just very nectar rich. So
Yeah.
having those flowering in your garden, if you want to attract pollinators, that's a really good thing. So even before we think about some of these more unusual plants, you know, just letting the grass grow, which my garden, like yours, Ed, was clearly just sort of a standard seed mix from the developer. Even just leaving it to grow now, it's going to be really, you know, so much better than just the short grass for wildlife.
Yeah, completely. And we should probably say as well, I mean, why this is so important, why we're talking about it, because I mean, this is against a backdrop of, you know, since the 1930s, what we've lost of 97, 98% of our wildflower meadows in this country. Now that's of 7.5 million acres have just have gone. And of course, insects are so important. And recent, I think it was a study in Germany from last year, which I think showed that a 76% decline in flying insects since 1989. And I think there's been research since then which has corroborated those findings as well, and which should really worry us. I mean, the bulk of all known animal species are insects. They're intimately associated with most sort of food chains. I mean, 87% of plants require animal pollination. 3/4 of our food crop require insect pollination, and they also, and they're also really vital to sort of our biological communities in other ways as well. Recycling nutrients, getting rid of decomposing leaves and timber, removing animal dung, animal corpses. That decline in insect numbers should be a real concern to us. And although we can't, and it's brutal to say that we can't really just directly help tigers and giraffes and polar bears and whales, but we can help the animals and plants and insects that live locally in our neighbourhood. And I think one of the ways we can do that is basically increasing, if you will, food production for our insect population.
Yeah, I think I don't really want a polar bear in my back garden, but I would quite like to feel like I'm doing something that helps wildlife out there. And also, while you're talking about the insect and invertebrate abundance in the lawn, of course, that's massively helpful for the other wildlife that might come in and use your garden as well, isn't it? So, of course, there are insects in there, but that's kind of why the birds have come in. It's not just I'm feeding them because I'm a bit erratic with my bird feeding. It's also because there's actually another food source in there, a natural food source for the birds that are coming in. I haven't got hedgehogs, but for some people that do have them, that's also why they're coming in, because they can find food in your garden. And a lot of that food source is the invertebrates that we support through, the kind of plants that we're growing in our gardens. So in a way, it's quite a positive message. So, because of course the research is not so hopeful necessarily, but on the other hand, it's lots of these small actions that we can take, that we can actually do, that at least at a local level could actually make quite a significant difference.
I think that's the point. We discussed this, I think, in previous episodes, the fact that even each garden might be small, but collectively you can make a huge difference. I mean, the potential is massive. It was 15 million gardens. What was it covering? What did we say? Covering a surface area of 7 Isle of Wights, I think. We said,
Wow.
yes, 600,000 hectares, a quarter of a city or town area tends to be domestic gardens. So absolutely, together it was part of that, a network of connected habitats.
Absolutely, and it goes back to what we said. At least it helps break up some of that grey, some of that concrete, doesn't it? So you kind of reduce some of the fragmentation that you get in more urban areas. So maybe that brings us a little bit onto kind of why we're talking about this in May as well. I'm not sure we've mentioned yet Plant Life's No Mow May campaign, who I'm partnering up with anyway to help me deliver some training for some of our volunteers. We should have been able to do that outside on site, but obviously things have moved a bit since we were planning that. And I'm getting some great support from them to speak to some of my volunteer and community groups about how to look after grass and meadows in the areas they live in. But we work at such small scales that really a lot of the areas we're talking about are very similar size to many people's gardens. So we've really tried to link up with Plant Life and their No Mow May campaign, which you can find with the hashtag No Mow May. And really they're just encouraging people to leave a patch of garden unmown, which I think, as we've been talking about, Ed, kind of, even if you do a small bit, you get quite an advantage. I don't know, have you mown any of your lawn at all this month?
No, not at all. We don't actually have a lawnmower, so
Oh, that helps.
I tend to get the scythe out if it needs cutting and just cut it back. But no, it's grown quite long. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's ideally to leave some long. I think if you don't cut it, you get a more diverse range of flowers. But if you are going to mow your lawn, then just do it every 4 weeks. Rather than, I think traditionally, isn't it? Everyone is out there every Sunday, and a lot of my neighbours are out there sort of very regularly. But I think Plant Life, I think they with their Every Flower Counts, I think, citizen science project that they've been running for the last few years. I think they've worked out that the most successful regime or mowing regime is every 4 weeks. It's cut to about 3 to 5 centimetres. And that gives a higher sort of flower and nectar production. So you get all your daisies and your white clover.
Does it matter then, does it make a difference how deeply you cut it? So if you cut it to 1 centimetre rather than you cut it at 3 or 4, does that make a difference?
I think so, because you don't want a billiard lawn, you don't want a billiard table lawn. That's not what you're after. So it's just high enough so you're retaining the sort of the ground covering flora. So yeah, so your daisies that you mentioned before and your clover, and I think in doing that, I think they worked out there's a 10-fold boost in nectar production by following a 4-weekly mowing regime. Whereas
that's a lot of food for a lot of bees, yeah.
Yeah, I think they sort of said that it was the average lawn was producing 12 grams of nectar per day, which support over 1,000 honeybees. And combined, I think this is all the, I think there's some 5,000 1-meter quadrants were surveyed, and they estimated that combined that was producing 23 kilograms of pollen per day. This is all these gardens across the country, which would support over 2 million bees or 60,000 beehives.
Good grief.
Yeah.
So is it easy to take part in that campaign? I think they're not running it yet, are they? They're running it at the end of the month?
I think it's towards the end of the month. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And you just count the flowers in the garden and they tell you how much nectar you've got?
Yes, I think you just take a sort of a 1-meter quadrant. So it takes place from 23rd to 31st of May. And I think all the details are on their website. So if you just use your search engine and put in Plant Life, Every Flower Counts will take you through to the page.
Okay, that's great.
But again, that's just an example of how, even your garden might be small, but collectively it just has it makes such a huge difference.
So obviously we've talked a bit about gardens. I'm lucky enough that I have an allotment as well, which, given the way that I garden and do allotments, is kind of quite rough around the edges, really. Obviously they're always a bit of a mixed bag up at the allotment, and we get lots of invertebrates and pollinators up there as well. So I'm also trying to do kind of no mowing in areas up there because I want to increase the pollinators that are there. And that's great, and I'm really lucky to do that. But I'm just thinking, like, what can we sort of suggest for people that don't have gardens, maybe can't access that? I mean, I know, like we mentioned, the verges before. So if you're on your daily walk, you can see the verges, and obviously you can see what plants are coming up. But maybe you'd like to be able to do something at home that's good for pollinators or invertebrates. It's maybe not the same as No Mow May, but I don't know. Have you got any thoughts about what people might be able to do?
Well, certainly just going back to the verges, one thing that people could do, not necessarily in their own gardens, is to actually do a bit of campaigning. And if people like what they see, and they like the look of the road verges, well, perhaps they take some photographic evidence of those verges and actually write to their local council and perhaps politely suggest to their council that to maybe look at adopting, shall we say, a more sort of sensitive and sympathetic mowing regime that supports wildflowers. Right. Would be definitely one course of action I think that people can take. But yeah, it's smaller gardens obviously appreciate not everyone has sort of a large, a garden that's large enough to have a lawn. But again, it's just looking at pollinating plants. Again, we've discussed on previous episodes of the podcast. Even if you've got just a little windowsill, or just a small patio area. There's lots of ways you can help, because planting in pots or window boxes, and say lots of ideas on our website as well, at bbowt.org.uk/actions as well. And there's plenty of tips on there about what you can do in the garden.
Yeah, actually, I was looking at those actions for nature. I think they're quite nice for seeing what plants are good for what kinds of pollinators as well, aren't they? So that's quite helpful when you're looking. And for me, it's quite interesting to remember that obviously we've talked about pollinators and flowers and nectar, and that's what the Every Flower Counts campaign is looking at. But when we're considering places like lawns and verges, there's a lot of grass in there, which is also great, because what we tend to forget is that, butterflies, for example, the adult butterfly needs nectar, so it will feed on pretty much anything to get nectar. But when it lays its eggs, it's much more selective. So the caterpillar itself needs different plants to grow on, and some of those plants that caterpillars need are grasses. And that's just butterflies that I'm talking about. The same could be said for all sorts of other invertebrates. So just not to forget as well that when you've got a garden and you're leaving an area to grow longer, it isn't just about having this wonderful display of flowers. It's about having grasses in there, and it's about having a different structure in your garden as much as it is about having nectar to supply, I think, isn't it? I mean, my garden is small, and I've got a front garden that I do actually mow around the edges of it because it looks better, but I always kind of leave a patch in the middle as well. I don't know, I just wanted to bring that in a bit, really, that the grasses are kind of just as important, really, as the flowers. And although we see these lovely pictures of amazing floral displays that, some councils have managed to do, you might not get that in the garden, but that really doesn't matter, because you've already provided a better habitat just by leaving it a bit longer.
Yeah, and it's just amazing. I was out on Saturday. We're recording this on Monday the 11th. It's a bit colder out there, a bit cold and windy out there today. But on Saturday it was just glorious. And I was out working in the garden most of the day, and it's just so uplifting. You're there, and you've got sort of birds sort of coming in, or butterflies. You've got the bees buzzing. And I think for all the vaunted benefits, the conservation benefits, I think we just always have to mention as well just how heart-lifting it is as well, just being out in that space when it's actually just buzzing with life. It's just actually it's just glorious.
Yeah, I think the same. I would agree with you. I think for me it's very much I've had a bit of time to be able to notice things. In a way that maybe I wouldn't have done at home. Obviously I do this at work, and I'm very lucky to do that, but just to take that bit of time out to care, so to care for the garden. But I think a lot of doing that, caring for the space, is also caring for yourself as well, and being allowed to, or able to, sit back and notice what's actually in there and really look at some of those plants and flowers. And not everyone will want to do kind of a flower count or a survey, but if even doing that Every Flower Count survey gives you 5-10 minutes to stop and look at what's there and just do a bit more noticing, I think that's really good for you. I think it's, for many people, that just being allowed to take that space and out of what else they're doing during the day, it has a huge effect on your well-being.
Hugely, and should share as well, and tell other people as well. Speak to your neighbours, your friends and family, and just share your stories. And I think that really helps get other people to notice as well. And by all means as well, just share it with us as well. If you see anything in your garden that either you just want to share or you don't know what it is, then if you just go through to one of social media, whether it's Facebook or BBOWT. If you use the hashtag podcast, probably, then we can keep an eye out for it and pick it up. And it'd be really interesting to see what you've got in your own gardens.
Yeah, that would be great. That's been really good to chat to you today about that, Ed, and just hear your ideas and thoughts around not mowing and what you get in the garden and verges. And from my point of view, it's really nice to have gone through some of these ideas, so when I do some more training with the volunteers, we've got more ideas and things to think about, as well as knowing where to go for advice, and if we want to do a survey, also having a look at that as well. So thanks.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's been a real pleasure having a chat with you today. I think now's probably a good time to go out and explore our little green spaces and get out in the garden and see what we can find.
You have been listening to the BBOWT podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. For more information about your local wildlife trust and how to join us, please visit www.bbowt.org.uk.